right now we'll stay with the Aaron Rodgers story. Of course, the Jets announcing earlier this week officially that they're moving on, and a guy who knows Aaron Rodgers about as well as anyone is the great Ian O'Connor, who wrote a best-selling book all about Rodgers that came out right before this disastrous Jets season, and Ian is nice enough to join us tonight over the phone. Ian, I really appreciate your time, my friend. Thanks for hopping on.
Hey, Jake, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to start with a report that actually came out in the New York Post right before my show started that reportedly Rodgers, when meeting with the Jets, basically pleaded to stay with the team, basically said that he would do whatever, that, quote, he accepted his fate at the end of the day like a man going to the gallows. And with your knowledge of Rodgers, getting to know him over the course of, how many interviews you've done with him and talking to people who do know him, do you buy that? Do you think he truly, really wanted to stay with the Jets when it was all said and done?
Jake, Ryan Dunleavy is a great reporter. I worked with him at the New York Post. I don't know Steve Helling, but that characterization would really surprise me, and I'm not saying it's not true, simply because Aaron doesn't beg for anyone's approval on anything, ever. So now he might think they're idiots for letting him walk, for basically firing him. And if you look at the wording of that press release, which did surprise me, there was some wiggle room there where the Jets could have said, we had conversations and we just couldn't come to an agreement, and we had a mutual parting of the ways. Instead, even though it was politely worded, they made it clear they fired him. And to me, that would be embarrassing to Aaron Rodgers. And I do think he wanted to stay a Jet. He made it clear publicly that was his first choice would be to remain a Jet. And I think he probably doesn't get enough credit for that how much this guy really gave to the Jets. He came here when it was a Loserville franchise, and he poured his heart and soul into this. There was more said about the two mandatory minicamp practices that he missed than about everything else he did in a positive way in terms of effort towards the New York Jets. So, that characterization of him effectively almost begging for his job, I just have a hard time reconciling. Just knowing him and talking to 250 people about him, it's possible, I guess. But my feeling is that he knew, and listen, once Muji and Glenn opened their mouths in that press conference to introduce them, and I've been doing press conferences in New York for almost 40 years. I only watched that one. I wasn't there. But as soon as they talked about Aaron Rodgers, you knew he wasn't coming back. It was the things they didn't say. You kept waiting for one of them to just say, yeah, at times this year, Aaron proved he could play at a high level still. They couldn't even say that. I mean, it just was very clear from that day that Aaron Rodgers was not going to be the starting quarterback of this team going forward.
Yeah, there were reports that the Jets and Rodgers had multiple conversations. Do you think there was ever any scenario where they were open to bringing him back? Because I agree with you. I think their minds were made up. But I do wonder, if they spoke multiple times, was there ever anything Rodgers could have done or agreed to that actually would have allowed them to maybe change their minds that feels like it was already made up, as you alluded to at the press conference? But was there anything that could have been done where he'd be the Jet quarterback for one more season?
I don't think so. That's my read on the situation. Others might disagree. They may publicly say otherwise, just out of respect to Aaron Rodgers when they talk more about this. But I think the moment they got the job, the two of them, they knew that someone else would be starting a quarterback on opening day next year. And I think Aaron knew that too. Now, he did want to remain a Jet. I think he's loved this market. And you remember the love affair when he first arrived, that first training camp, and just the way the city embraced him, despite the fact that a lot of people who live in New York City don't agree with his political views and his views on, obviously, the vax and other things. Nobody in New York City cared about that. It was a love affair like I've never seen before. And he was eating it up. I really think he enjoyed the market. He enjoyed living in New Jersey. And it just, the night he ruptured his Achilles, he ruptured the dream with it. The only night we actually got to experience the dream as a market with him playing was the home opener this year. That night was unbelievable. The Jets are 2-1. He looked great. He looked young. He looked mobile. He looked athletic. And I went back the other night and listened to the Amazon Prime broadcast of that game, and Kirk Herbstreit said it perfectly. Towards late in that game, he said, I don't even want to talk. I just want to watch this. This is beautiful. Aaron Rodgers looks like as good as he's ever looked, and that Al Michaels agreed. And to hear them chant his name, to leave the building that night when the Jets are 2-1, and he looked like that. And I don't know if you were there, Jake. I was. I felt leaving the building. I thought they'd go 10-7 and maybe win one playoff game. I started thinking, well, maybe they'll go 12-5. You could have never, ever made me believe they were going 5-12 when I left the building that night. But he took some hits against Denver, and that changed everything.
I'm right there with you, and I was there that night as well. And I had similar feelings as a diehard fan of this team. 2-1, and you're thinking, wow, okay, here we go. Rodgers, took a couple games to shake off the rust, and now he's going to be, the Aaron Rodgers of old. And it just feels like they lose that Denver game. He takes a beating in that one. They go to London, lose that, and then when Woody Johnson fired Robert Saleh, whether you think Saleh is a great coach or not, it clearly just sent this season into a complete spiral. And, obviously one of the bigger what-ifs in Jets history is what if Aaron never got hurt week 1 in 2023. But I think another big what-if is what if Saleh just remained the head coach this year? Was there any scenario where they maybe could have salvaged, this season with Rodgers, who ended up playing all 17 games?
Listen, Jake, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but I had a tweet. It was before the London game. I believe it was right after the Denver game and I had heard something that Woody was getting antsy. And I believe, and I could be wrong by a week, but I believe it was before the London game. I tweeted out, it'd be a good idea for the Jets to win this game if Robert Saleh wants to stick around long term, because I think if he loses this game and he loses the Buffalo game, that he's gone, that Woody's going to make a move. And I thought Saleh deserved at least one more game, but I'll be honest with you. I did not think it was a terrible decision at the time to get rid of him. I did not think Robert Saleh was a very good head coach, and you could not let this thing get away from the Jets at that point. So I thought Woody acted a week too early, and as it turned out, he shouldn't have done what he did, because Jeff Ulbrich put on the second worst display of coaching in any New York sport I've ever seen, and I'm 60 years old. So I did not have any idea that Ulbrich would be that bad at the job of being a head coach, but he was beyond horrific. It wasn't just the coaching on game day. It was the things he was saying during the week at the podium. I called it enabling gibberish, praising people like Hassan Reddick.
Most selfless player he's ever been around, Hassan Reddick.
Right. And then Michael Clemens, I think he was praising his motor. These were guys who were getting destroyed every week. Now, I understand with today's athletes, you don't want to rip them publicly nearly as much as old school managers and head coaches did back in the day. But that doesn't mean you have to say what Ulbrich was saying. It was total nonsense. And I'll always respect him as a player and as a defensive coordinator, and he seemed like a very nice guy. But, man, it was hard to have a lot of respect for him after the way he handled himself publicly, particularly with that unit that to me was almost a disgrace this year. And people want to talk about Aaron Rodgers all the time as the face of this 5-12, and maybe rightfully so, because he's Aaron Rodgers. And some of it he brings on himself. But that defense was heartless, gutless, clueless, any other less you can think of. And obviously the kicker. But I still think to this day, and it sounds crazy because they went 5-12, and I was saying this to somebody in Jets land today, that one or two plays in that early stretch of week 4, 5, and 6 goes the Jets' way, and maybe they're 4-3 after 7 games instead of 2-5, that could have changed the entire season. They would have had confidence, and the problem was once they started losing and it snowballed, it just got out of control. And I just think a kick here, a stop there, and this whole thing could have been 10-7 and win a game in the playoffs, and obviously it went the other way.
Totally agree. Ian O'Connor joining us here, 5-time New York Times bestseller, longtime columnist, of course, in this city, and he wrote the book that came out right before the Jet season all about Aaron Rodgers. That's a must-read if you're not only a Jet fan, but just a football fan in general. As far as Rodgers goes from here, Ian, I mean, do you expect him to be able to find a team? I think personally he still wants to play, and I think he still could play at a decently high level. He's not what he once was, but I think with the right situation, it wouldn't shock me if he has a good season and can help a team reach the playoffs. What are your thoughts on where Aaron could go, assuming he does want to play, and your thoughts on what type of player he still is at this stage of his career?
I had one Aaron Rodgers friend text me the Raiders. I had another text me the Titans. One thinks he wants to play multiple years. And listen, the Achilles injury, particularly at that age, it's a 2-year rehab. He basically just played a rehab season. Next year is his first year healthy. Now, if he takes some hits at that age, he gets hurt again, so be it. But I think getting away from the Achilles one more year really frees him up. And I actually think if he gets a chance to play, and I do think there will be at least one team that wants him, that he will look better. He'll look more healthy, even though he's a year older. And I think he'll play at least a little better next year, certainly more consistently than he played this year. Problem with the Raiders, well, with the Raiders, obviously Tom Brady's there. That would be a positive because he played at an age older right now than Aaron Rodgers and was effective. I'm not saying Rodgers is as good as Tom Brady's not, but I think Brady would have an easier time believing in the concept of Aaron Rodgers being successful at this age. Joe Philbin is also in the Raiders organization. Philbin loves Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers loves him back. That's a positive. But the problem is you look at that division, and you look at the people he's going to have to deal with, Mahomes and Reed and Herbert and Harbaugh and Sean Payton and to a lesser degree Bo Nix. Rodgers might play well and still finish last in that division, which takes me to the Titans. The Titans, you look at it, you're like, well, why would he want to go to another losing franchise and maybe finish 5-12 again? But he goes there with Davante Adams, and they also picked the best player in college football in the draft. You can win that division. You're there with the Texans and the Colts and the Jaguars. I think Aaron Rodgers would look at that and say, we might be able to navigate this. Just get me in the tournament, and let's hope we get hot. Look what happened with the Commanders this year. So you can turn things around really quickly in the NFL. If I had to put down $50 right now, I would probably put it on the Titans. Obviously, there are a lot of dominoes yet to fall. We don't know about Derek Carr. Where's he going to play? Matthew Stafford, where's he going to play? So some things could open up here. I do think if the Brock Purdy injury turned out to be more serious, Aaron Rodgers would end up being the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. But seems like Purdy is going to be okay. He's going to get his contract, and that's the dream scenario. Rodgers always wanted to play for that franchise, and that one looks off the board.
As far as the Jets go, Ian, I mean, how do they recover from the Rodgers era? And I'm not even putting it all on Rodgers because the Jets were bad before Aaron Rodgers. They'll likely be bad without him if history continues to follow suit here. But if Aaron Glenn's going to be the guy to finally turn this franchise around, your thoughts on what he's going to have to ultimately do if that's going to happen?
Well, he's just got to get the quarterback position right, obviously. And listen, we just saw a team win a Super Bowl with a second-round quarterback and a great defensive line. I think, obviously, the defensive line needs fixing, and that was a huge mistake, among others, by Joe Douglas to allow the deterioration of that defensive line because that really killed the Jets this year. So maybe they take the kid from Michigan with that first pick. Maybe with their second pick, they take a quarterback, whether it's Jackson Dart or someone else. So I think it's going to come down to, okay, is it Tyrod Taylor, who has started 15 games in the last 7 years? So in the last 7 years, he's averaging 2 starts in the NFL through injury or just not being good enough to start. And so suddenly we're going to ask this guy to play 15 games. I don't think so. I think that if you told me his quarterback room is going to be Derek Carr, Tyrod Taylor, and Jackson Dart, okay. And I think Aaron Glenn, listen, he coached against Rodgers in Detroit. He shut him down that last game in Green Bay. And he has every right to tell Aaron Rodgers, you're not going to be my quarterback. I'm an Aaron Glenn fan. I covered him to some degree as a columnist when he was a player in the 90s. He's a winner. I think he's a strong man, and he's going to have a strong voice. And if he wants a different quarterback, okay, but you better be right. If Rodgers goes somewhere else and plays well, and you don't get this quarterback situation fixed in the next 2 years, hey, 3 years from now, you might be the next Aaron leaving town.
Right.
So I think that if you tell me what's his quarterback room going to look like at the start of next season, and if you told me it was either Justin Fields or Derek Carr and Tyrod Taylor and a young quarterback you can develop that you just drafted, okay, I'll accept that, and we'll all move on.
As far as Davante Adams goes, Ian, do you think that he's basically going to try and go wherever Aaron Rodgers goes, based on what you're hearing and what you know about Aaron and Davante's relationship?
I do. I do, and I think it makes all the sense in the world. And I wonder where the Jets are going to go for their second and third receivers. And one thing I'd like to say, Jake, about Garrett Wilson, and I've written this and I've said it on the air, I think Garrett Wilson has a chance to be the best receiver the Jets have ever had, including Don Maynard. I love the way he carries himself 99% of the time, and I think he's a great talent. But Aaron Glenn should take him into a room, turn on the tape. Hey, you made the best play of the season by far against the Texans. It was unbelievable, the Air Jordan catch. But I want to show you another play. Okay, that drop against the Steelers. We talk about the 5 most damaging plays of the Jets season that turned into an interception that was basically a pick six. It's 16-15 at that point. We could have gotten the momentum back. We win that game, and the Jets are what at that point, 3-4? You can't drop that pass that a high school receiver needs to catch and turn that into effectively a pick six. And that game, that drop was very damaging. So it's not everybody else has to get better. And Garrett Wilson, who obviously wasn't happy towards the end of the season, maybe thinking about asking for a trade. Hey, you need to get better too. And that was one of the most damaging plays of the season. And so it's all about Aaron Rodgers, and he's the face of 5-12. But there are a lot of people who weren't fired this week who need to get a lot better playing football for the Jets to be something other than 5-12 next season.
Completely agree. Finally, Ian, just covering the Jets up close and obviously, understanding football history and knowing Aaron Rodgers. As time goes on here, do you think ultimately when we look back on the Aaron Rodgers era, people are going to blame him or they're going to blame, it's just the Jets, they've been bad? Do you think, how will Rodgers' tenure with the Jets ultimately age amongst football fans going forward?
That is a great question. I think right now it's blame Aaron Rodgers, but I really think 10, 15, 20 years from now, it was the Jets. What'd you expect? Actually, Brett Favre played well for the Jets until he got hurt.
Right.
But they didn't make the playoffs, and sort of because he did play well with Minnesota, people say, it was the Jets. Favre had really nothing to do with it. I think people will think it's the Jets and also the injury. Let's face it, that Achilles thing was so devastating. And I really do think this past year, what we just witnessed was Aaron Rodgers throwing 28 touchdowns against 11 interceptions, nearly 4,000 yards in a rehab season. That, to me, there were only a few games where he looked young and mobile and athletic again. I think he was rehabbing the entire year. And I know he said his Achilles felt great and he had these other leg injuries. The other thing, some coach had to step in there in the early part of the schedule, maybe after the Denver game at some point, and say, we paid Tyrod Taylor good money for a reason. We got to use our entire roster. He's got to play the next 2 weeks until you get healthy again. Aaron was out there playing on one leg. So that never should have happened. And if he plays for another team, they better have a good backup quarterback who can play 2 or 3 games to let his legs heal. Eventually he's going to get hurt to some degree. So I think that was another major unforced error by the Jets coaching staff to have not used Tyrod Taylor, who's a pro's pro and a very good backup. Again, he's only started 15 games the last 7 years. I don't want to see him as a starting quarterback for the Jets in 2025. I'd love for them to get a Justin Fields, who is flawed, but hey, he had 10 touchdowns throwing and running against 1 interception in 6 games for the Steelers when he finally got some good coaching. And so I think there's some upside there. Derek Carr would be interesting with Taylor as the backup, and then the quarterback you draft and develop. That's a pretty good quarterback room. I'd accept that, and I think they need to put something like that together.
Totally agree. Ian, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Great insight and continued success on all the books you're writing. I'm sure you're already working on something else. If I had to guess, I don't know if you could reveal that on the air, but whatever the book is, I look forward to reading it.
Thanks, man. It's a basketball book, and I'll announce it probably later this week. Meanwhile, I just want to say, man, you've got a great show. I watch it all the time. I learned a lot while writing about Aaron Rodgers, researching his life. The Jets mass therapy group that you do on the Jake Asman Show on YouTube is awesome. So if you're out there, you don't need to be a Jets fanatic to really appreciate it because it's great content, and congratulations on that.
I appreciate it, Ian. We'll get you on that YouTube show soon because I know the Asmaniacs would love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Ian O'Connor joining us there, longtime columnist in this town and an excellent sports writer, 5-time New York Times bestseller. His book he wrote about Aaron Rodgers that came out on August 20th before the Jet season started. Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. One of the best sports books I've read, so definitely check that out if you're a football fan.